In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the latest trade rumors around the NHL. We're looking at teams like the Vancouver Canucks, the Boston Bruins, Winnipeg Jets, and the Montreal Canadiens. Plus, we're going to look at some more signings we have, more NHL news out of Philadelphia. We're going to the President of Hockey Operations role, and we're going to recap some of the latest playoff action. All that coming up next. Well, welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover today. Let's get started with recapping some of the latest NHL playoff action. Last night, we saw a couple more games where they weren't super close. A lot of the games around two, outside of the Toronto-Florida series, the games have one team that keeps taking turns on the other, having not really either a blowout or winning by a wide margin. It's not been the most competitive hockey that we can see, which has been a little bit disappointing so far. So I'd say for that reason, Toronto-Florida has probably been my favorite series to watch, because even though it's a 3-0 series lead, at least all the games have been close. But Carolina defeated New Jersey last night 6-1 to take a 3-1 stranglehold in that series. Marty Necas scored a couple of goals. Freddie Anderson stood tall for Carolina. The Devils once again had to have a goalie change partway through the game. Certainly not a good effort by the Devils, who came out on home ice after winning Game 3 and just really didn't have a solid effort. Carolina just completely steamrolled them. They couldn't really answer their forecheck and just totally dominated and took over that game. Jack Hughes had an early first goal for the Devils, which was the highlight for New Jersey. After that, it was all Carolina the rest of the way. The Dallas Stars defeated the Seattle Kraken 6-3 last night. Jake Auger had a much better game. Of course, his record is kind of like Vasilevsky-esque in the sense that he does really, really well and rarely loses back-to-back games, and especially in the kind of fashion we've seen happen in these playoffs against the Kraken especially. Andrews had a couple of bad games so far in these playoffs, but he's always done much better the second time around. So Dallas evens up that series, 2 games apiece now, heading into Game 5, going back to Dallas. Of course, tonight we have our first elimination game in round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs, with the Leafs and Panthers doing battle in game number 4. The Panthers are trying to sweep the Leafs, and the Leafs are trying to stay alive and force a Game 5 back in Toronto. So we'll see if the Leafs can respond. I know they've been, obviously, getting extra time between games here with the break in the schedule. The way it's been done up here. I don't know if that's going to be good or bad. Probably better for Toronto than Florida, to be honest. Joseph Woll will be starting in place of Ilya Samsonov, who is injured to the point that he cannot play or back up. So Matt Murray will be the backup tonight for Toronto. And of course, the other game tonight, we'll see the Edmonton Oilers trying to bounce back and even up their series in Game 4 against the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, as I mentioned, we have a few signings here today as well, and some news out of Philadelphia. Let's start with the Flyers news. Earlier today, Frank Saravalli of DailyFaceoff.com was reporting that the president of hockey ops role for the Flyers was narrowed down to Ed Olchak or Keith Jones. Now we're getting word from some Philadelphia media. I know Chris Therien, former player and current, obviously member of the media, was reporting earlier, and as a few other people have kind of backed up the report, saying that Keith Jones is going to indeed be the new president. As I record this, the team itself has not officially announced that, but based on the people reporting it and the sources, I suspect that's going to be confirmed and be the case. Danny Briere, of course, is still interim GM, and part of the process here will be him becoming a full-time permanent GM and removing the interim tag. Keith Jones is an interesting choice. He's been involved in media a long time. Of course, he's a former Philadelphia Flyers player. Had a fairly long, good career in the NHL. I am a little bit surprised by the choice, to be honest. Was not really having any recent experience to justify that he's going to be good in the role. At the same time, not saying he doesn't know the sport. He does. Knows the game well. Been involved with between working in the studio or play-by-play for quite a long time. It's just typically these roles you just see somebody a little bit more hockey ops experience, but we'll see. Hopefully Keith Jones is the right guy for the job in Philly. They certainly like to hire their former players, and that trend certainly continues in this case. And then so you'll have Jones as president, Briere as GM, Tortorella as head coach, all working together. And of course, they have a high pick coming up in the 23 NHL draft as well. So I'll be curious to see how this team starts to move forward with their new regime in place. Some signings today. We said Chicago Blackhawks have re-signed young goalie Arvid Soderblom. He gets a 2-year contract extension of $962,000. He did get a decent amount of NHL games this year, but likely will be more than likely an AHL goalie next year, with the possibility of being called up again. We also seen the Boston Bruins sign one of their top prospects, Mason Lohrei, as a really big glove shot defenseman, 6'4", 200-pound, 22-year-old player. He was a second-round pick in the 2020 draft and has played the last couple of seasons at Ohio State University. So Mason will be making the jump to pro hockey and leaving the college hockey behind. So we'll see how he makes out. I would imagine he'll definitely have to start in probably in Providence to see where things go from there. And the St. Louis Blues as well have signed Matthias Laferriere. It was a settlement to a one-year contract extension, $775,000. He's played the last couple of seasons in the American Hockey League. So at this point, he hasn't seen any NHL action to date. Now on to some rumor mill action around the NHL. We heard comments from Bruins GM Don Sweeney and Cam Neely after they were eliminated from the playoffs. They recently spoke to the media talking about how this team is definitely going to be different next year. Sweeney said we aren't going to be the same team. They also talked about some of the pending UFAs, which is a lot of the players they acquired at the deadline. They have a very limited amount of salary cap space. They have a bonus overage from especially from like the contracts of the guys that they signed, like Bergeron and Krejci, to cheap salaries, but had bonus structures in place that'll count next year. So they're very, very, very tight up against it. They said out of the UFAs, if you have guys like Bertuzzi, Orlov, Hathaway, that they're probably only going to be able to keep one, and that's of course assuming they can come to terms on a new contract. But one at most would be all they'd be able to keep, which is not a huge surprise by any means. The feeling around Bruins media is that they would probably prefer to keep Tyler Bertuzzi above the others. So they'll probably try hardest to sign him, but he will be, fairly pricey. He had himself a real good playoff run, even though the team didn't do well. He personally did. So he's shown that he could be a playoff performer, and this is the first time he's been in the playoffs, and he's been productive in the regular season, and he's, plays in a gritty style of hockey on top of that, so it's certainly something that's coveted and viewed upon as being essential for playoffs. So I suspect he's going to be able to do well in the open market, making it more challenging for Boston to retain him, but I suspect they will try hard to keep him. As far as some Bruins players that could be traded in order to create some much-needed salary cap space, according to Bruins media, NHL insiders like Frank Saravalli, he's listed Taylor Hall as being a very likely trade piece, as well as defenseman Matt Grzelcyk. Taylor Hall, not that they don't like Hall, but based on what he's getting paid for what he produces, and if you look at the roster and some decent-sized contracts, who's making more than a small amount of money that they might be able to move and live without, they feel that Hall is a little bit more replaceable than some of the other top guys. Obviously, at this point, we don't know if Krejci or Bergeron's going to have any desire to come back, and if so, what that would look like. They obviously would want to trade Marchand or Pasternak. Jake DeBrusk had a good season. They wouldn't completely rule out DeBrusk being moved, but, based on, him being younger and, equally or better productive, I would say Hall is probably the more likely guy to be shopped. Doesn't mean he's going to be dealt, of course. They may not find a deal they like. Same goes for Grzelcyk. Of course, Grzelcyk at times was a healthy scratch in the playoffs. They have enough defensemen that they might be able to go a little bit of a cheaper route to replace him. So those are a couple of Bruins players that could find themselves on the move if the right deals present themselves. So we'll see how the Bruins look next year. It's going to be interesting to see how they respond and how many players from this team end up moving on. I know there were some rumors regarding goalie Linus Ullmark as well. At this point, I don't have any strong enough reports from reputable sources to suggest that the Bruins would consider a goalie trade, but I would think Jeremy Swayman, who is a restricted free agent, might be a potential target. If any team wants to offer sheet somebody this year, Swayman might be a guy to look to, given the tight cap situation in Boston. So we'll see, but definitely going to be some changes for sure. How deep they go will depend on some of the decisions they make, so we'll see. In Vancouver, lots of talk around creating cap flexibility, which has been really the talk since Jim Rutherford's arrived, and he really hasn't done anything much by that way as of yet. I know Rick Dollywall, of course, a Vancouver reporter here in the area, confirmed numerous times recently on his show, the Donnie and Daly show, that he believes the Canucks are still open to trading JT Miller before his no-trade clause kicks in, and they might even prefer it, but at the same time, it's quite challenging to find a deal. Odds of it happening are probably slim, just given the fact of the brand new contract kicking in. but they do believe that Connor Garland is the most likely. Of course, Brock Besser's name has been mentioned in there too, but given Besser's contract being a little steeper and, and the fact that he hasn't, exactly lived up to it, he's had his struggles, which we can say for sure. I mean, lots of good reasons in there why he struggled, but the fact is it doesn't change the fact that he has. In Garland's side of things, there was lots of interest in Garland when he was traded to Vancouver from Arizona, and there could be lots of interest, including a team like Boston really was interested in Garland before. Of course, now their cap situation is pretty tight, so I'm not sure how they would make that happen. They'd have to have something else move out, so we'll see if they ever connect, but this is just one potential destination that was mentioned a long time ago. But Garland is the guy most likely to go in Vancouver, according to Vancouver media, that they can create a little bit of cap flexibility to hopefully do some other things with here. We know the Winnipeg Jets are bound to have a fair bit of change. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. We do know that goalie Connor Hellebuyck has made it clear that he does not want to be part of a rebuild, and there's been lots of talk around him lately. If the Jets do decide to go more down that road, he could ask for a trade. And really, considering how good of a goalie he is, it's not often you see a goalie of his caliber come on the trade market. They would have no doubts. There'd be no issues trading him. There'd be lots of teams interested, that much for sure. And they should be able to get a pretty good haul in return. There's been numerous teams mentioned around Hellebuyck. I know someone mentioned his home state team of Detroit. I've heard of teams like Ottawa, Buffalo, where there's a little bit of uncertainty in who might be in between the pipes. Buffalo, I would rule out. I think they're going to go with Levi myself. Ottawa, there's definitely some question marks. But another team that comes up, which has been mentioned here by Frank Saravalli and others, is the Los Angeles Kings. We don't know the Kings' goalie situation next year. They do want to move Cal Peterson. We do know that, and they would probably need to do that in order to facilitate any kind of other goaltender trade, whether it be Peterson involved in that trade or a separate deal. Either way, they need to get that salary off the books. Phoenix Copley is signed for another season, so he's certainly going to be around. But Jonas Korpisalo, who they acquired at the deadline, and who did play pretty well, but didn't have the greatest showing in the playoffs, could be an option for them to re-sign and go that route and go with Korpisalo and Copley again, but they may choose to go a different route, especially if they have an option to do an upgrade and have the quality goaltender of Hellebuyck. We know the Winnipeg Jets would be interested in a variety of different, younger players coming back, and the LA Kings have a deep prospect pool of players that are not all going to play for the Kings. They have a variety of forwards and defensemen that will likely interest Winnipeg. The only issue with Winnipeg maybe trading Hellebuyck, and I understand the sentiment if they feel like they have to, or if he wants out, or what have you, but who's going to be the goaltender for the Winnipeg Jets? What are they going to do? They need to replace him, and I don't see them trading him and taking back like a guy like Cal Peterson to play. Like, there's no heir apparent to Hellebuyck in the Jets system. It's not really clear who or what they could do to have a good goaltender between the pipes. So I don't really know the solution or the answer to that question, which would be, certainly a big deal for Winnipeg. So I would imagine that Kevin Cheveldayoff at, all costs here will try his best to not trade Hellebuyck so he has more time to get that figured out. But he's only going to move, in my opinion, if he actually comes out and asks for a trade. Otherwise, why would you move a goaltender that good? Now, lots of debate in Montreal now that the draft lottery is complete. We've heard lots and lots over several months about Pierre-Luc Dubois maybe being dealt to the Montreal Canadiens, likely at this year's draft over the summertime. Of course, he's going to be entering the final year of his RFA status before he can become a UFA. Some feel that if Montreal really wants him and he wants to go there, he should just wait, play another year in Winnipeg or somewhere else, and they could sign him as an unrestricted free agent, which in some ways would be smart. At the same time, if they want to make sure they get their guy and they can get him locked up to a longer-term deal now, then obviously a trade would be required. Winnipeg wouldn't have a lot of leverage, so I wouldn't think they'd have to pay as much as you might think to get it done. But I know there's some Montreal media and lots of fans on social media discussing the topic of should they trade their first-round pick for Dubois. Now that the draft lottery's done, they know exactly where they're picking, which is number 5 overall. Would you trade the 5th overall pick for Pierre-Luc Dubois? My answer would be not a chance. I mean, this draft is going to be quite deep and lots of great players that could be, franchise-altering one capacity or another, depending on where you're at. But now, number 5, you're going to get yourself a really good player. I mean, in the case of Pierre-Luc Dubois, you still might be able to get him in another way. But that's been the big debate that I've seen. A lot of fans on social media seem to think that's what it would take to get Dubois out of Winnipeg? I honestly don't think it would. Like I said, Montreal would not. They'd have all the leverage because Dubois wants to be there, wants to sign with them, and Winnipeg, he doesn't want to stay in Winnipeg. So what does Winnipeg really have to kind of negotiate hard with? There's not much there. So to me, it only makes sense that maybe they offer the lower first-round pick to him, the one that belongs to Florida, and some sort of, maybe a prospect or two. I mean, it'd be more of a package like that. But if the Jets are going to insist on the 5th overall pick for Pierre-Luc Dubois, I'm Ken Hughes. I hang up the phone and I say, no thanks. We'll wait. Either change your price or I'll just sign him next year. I would not give up that pick when you can get a really good player that would be very helpful to have in your franchise for a long time. So to me, I wouldn't do it, but I'd love to know what you think down in the comments. If that's the price, would you make that deal? If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around and keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.